Looks like some folks are still filtering in. We'll give it one more minute and we'll get started. Hey, well, hello there. Welcome, everybody. Today, we will be talking about the Silverfort ServiceNow integration for enhanced identity protection. We're primarily going to be talking about this in the context of the service account domain. So we'll set the stage. We'll talk a little bit about what that means and walk through what we're doing with ServiceNow here at Silverfort. On the call today, you've got myself, Frank Gasparovic. I'm the Director of Solution Architecture for Technology Alliances here at Silverfort. And you also have Davey Demitz. Davey, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hey, hello everybody. So my name is Davey. I work in Frank's team. I'm a solutions architect, and yeah, we try to build cool technical integrations between Silverfort and other platforms.
Awesome. A couple housekeeping notes. The session is being recorded. You will receive a link to a recording shortly after the session in your inbox. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. We will address them as we go. And if we have time at the end, we will cover the ones that we don't get to throughout the session. This is a live session, so if you find yourself disconnected, you can use the same URL to connect again. And I think with that, we can jump into the next slide. We've got an action-packed agenda today. We'll start by talking about service accounts, what they are, what their purpose is, what risks are associated with them. Next, we'll talk through how Silverfort protects those accounts today, what we're doing in that arena. We'll talk you through what ServiceNow, how the ServiceNow and the Silverfort integration works, and then we'll wrap up with a demo and we will take some questions. Next slide. What are service accounts? You go to the next slide, Dave. So service accounts are dedicated non-human accounts used by applications, systems, and services to interact with other systems. Often they are used to perform scheduled actions, and they're repeatedly used in the background for things like inter-service communication. Think things like backups, SQL servers, deploy scripts, etc. All have service accounts that are being used for this intercommunication process. Sometimes user accounts can be used as service accounts in things like timely scripts. Next slide. So why do they pose a risk? What are the risks associated with them? The first risk is a lack of visibility. It can be a challenge to see what these accounts are connecting to and when they are connecting. And this can make it difficult to get true visibility into these service accounts in an organization. In addition to that, they lack clear ownership. Oftentimes, service accounts are created years ago from folks that are no longer with an organization. And it can be a challenge for folks to uncover what the original purpose of an undocumented service account really was. In addition to that, they tend to have high risk. These are service accounts, they're often overloaded, having access to many systems as they were reused for new projects, and sometimes they just outright have admin access and are severely overused. And then finally, just a general lack of security controls. You really can't enforce things like MFA on non-human identities, and we'll talk a little bit about how we address that risk as well. Next slide. What are some of the common identity security blind spots in this, in regards to service accounts? In almost every company that we talk to, there are critical assets, as I mentioned, that just can't be effectively protected with traditional identity security control like MFA. These are legacy systems, command line interfaces, remote PowerShell, IT and OT infrastructure, file shares, and many more. Think basically about things that authenticate to Active Directory through Kerberos, LDAP, NTLM, and just doesn't support MFA. This is a security issue, but it's often also a compliance issue with things like regulation, cyber insurance requirements, and many others. The second blind spot is mapping and protecting these service accounts. Even just finding them at all and figuring out where they're being used can be a big challenge. And then from there, protecting at scale is almost impossible with existing tools, because if you change the service accounts, you could break an application that relies on them. Final blind spot is around securing privileged access. Many organizations use PAM solutions to manage privileged access and rotate these account passwords. But in reality, there are many privileged accounts that are just too difficult to protect in this way. And another problem we see is that folks will check out these passwords, they'll log into a PAM solution, they'll grab the credentials, but then the next time they'll just use these credentials directly with the server and bypass the PAM solution entirely. Next slide. So at Silverfort, we enable real-time protection with virtual fencing for service accounts. And you can see the graphic here. We've got a little robot or a service account in between two fences. That's a little bit like what we're doing here at Silverfort. Next slide. So we make it easy to discover, analyze, and protect service accounts in your organization. We do this by discovering all of the service accounts that are used, and we do this by things like naming conventions that are commonly used by service accounts and usage patterns of these accounts over time. Next slide. From there, we're able to map all of the sources and the destinations that these service accounts are currently being used with. And we give security and identity teams the ability to enforce protection on these service accounts. We lock them down and we control which sources and destinations they can be used with. We generate risk levels that can be configured to either trigger alerts or block access entirely so that these accounts cannot be used outside of their normal usage patterns. Next slide. So that's a little bit about what we do to protect service accounts here at Silverfort. And with that, I can pass it over to Davey, and we can talk a little bit about how the integration with ServiceNow works. Davey, over to you.
All right. Thanks, Frank. So indeed, before we go into in depth on what our integration is and what it does and what it can mean for you, we just need to spend a little bit of time on ServiceNow and especially on the part where we will focus on, because probably most of you know that ServiceNow is a pretty big platform. It's a modern cloud-based platform that provides multiple products. The product that we will be focusing on in this integration is actually the ITSM module, or IT Service Management, which basically allows you to build and manage resilient IT services on the platform itself, using automated workflows, have collaboration capabilities, etc. Inside the ITSM, there's the Configuration Management Database, right, or the CMDB. CMDB allows you to keep track of all kinds of, let's say, resources, or what they call configuration items, doing incident management, configuration management, change management, etc. So a lot of things can be tracked inside the CMDB, as probably most of you are familiar with. Just a little recap on what is a CMDB in a bit more detailed. It's actually a sort of a database or a data warehouse where you can store all kinds of information on hardware, software that you have, networks that you have in your environment, all with the purpose of having configuration management in there, tracking their usage, for example, maintenance, which software version you're on, who's responsible for these different components, etc. And also defining the relationships between them. So in the CMDB, or in the ServiceNow CMDB, all these items are called configuration items. And we'll use this term later on as well. Between configuration items and other components in the CMDB, we have the capabilities of putting relationships in between them, linking them some way to each other because there is this kind of relationship. For example, one web application could use a backend database, and then there would be a relationship defined in the CMDB that shows what is necessary between those two elements in order to have the app or the web app work properly. Everything is around managing this information in there, so it's not really running it, it's really about managing it, as I mentioned before, change management, etc. So it's a very important aspect to have this in your mind when we're continuing this webinar, because these are the components that we will be using later on in the integration. If we would look at a data sheet from ServiceNow, they actually put a really nice part in there where they say that the CMDB is a trusted single system of record at the top right of the data sheet. It really means that you can have a lot of data sources, and especially in a complex, rapidly changing environment, and all these data sources have different data in there. It's hard to keep track. The whole idea about CMDB is consolidating that data, breaking down these silos of source of data sources, and correlating as much as info as possible into one spot, which in the end gives you a full end-to-end visibility on the infra, on the applications, your services, users that are in there, etc. So all this thing in a central location. And this is a very important part for us, because what we are interested in is applications that are in the CMDB or in the ServiceNow CMDB and are managed in there. As I said, you can keep track of software versions, for example, for the application versions, if they're in-house or externally developed, it doesn't matter. Keep track of them, what's their operational state, is this test environment, production environment, etc. But also the services and servers that are basically hosting the app. It's running on some kind of backend service. Also, applications are run by machine and service account that Frank already explained. We call this non-human identities business. There's no human doing any kind of authentication with these accounts. These applications need that account in order to have access to, like I said, for example, a database or any other service or data store somewhere running in the environment. And they use that account to get authorized and authenticated access to it. Most of the applications are managed by a specific application owner who is responsible for the app and everything around it. And again, as I mentioned, an application is an example of a configuration item in the CMDB, same way that a server would be that, web server or just a backend server, etc. So that was a little bit background on what ServiceNow is. I think it for most of you was a little recap. So the question is, why did we build an integration between Silverfort and ServiceNow, specifically the CMDB? Well, let's put both next to each other and let's focus on the components that we are using in this integration. As you all probably know, Silverfort is a unified identity protection platform. We position ourselves on top of existing IAM IDP infrastructure, sort of a second layer authentication firewall, let's say, if you want to name it that way. But our main capabilities is about identity protection. We provide also insights, etc. But for this integration, we're focused on the protection part, specifically the service account protection that Frank explained. Now, when we're looking at the ServiceNow component, we're looking, as I mentioned, to the CMDB part of the ITSM solution, and specifically on applications and services that are managed in there or tracked in there. As I mentioned, they run on machine accounts. So I hope you start seeing here where we want to go there, because what we want to do is we're going to leverage our virtual fencing capability to secure service accounts by syncing both of these worlds. We have a direct sync between the machine accounts that are related to the applications in the CMDB and the service account virtual fencing policy inside Silverfort. This way, we can secure the identities of the service account and environment, any access requests that they have, any authentications that they do, with a real-time synchronization. Whenever someone is changing something in the CMDB, it gets immediately reflected real-time into our policy. And that's the goal why we want this integration in place. One thing that you can do with this is that a sync enhances your identity security coverage. That makes sense, but it also allows you to secure your apps now at scale, right? Again, we explained the virtual fencing capability that we have for secure our service accounts, but think about automation. If you have, let's say, about an organization with 100 service accounts, you could manually tune and tweak these policies. If you have more than 1,000 service accounts or 1,000 plus, that starts to be a bit more difficult, right? That's why we have automation capabilities in there, like the smart policies feature that we have, allowing you to easily manage multiple policies at the same time or have a better way of scaling these policies. It makes it easier to manage, lower risk of mistakes when you're doing this, and also the collaboration between teams is easier. But we wanted to take this a step further. If we can also leverage the CMDB to get this automation in place, we can now also have another place and a more advanced way of getting the data in there, besides using our smart policies capabilities. And that's actually what we had, also feedback that we had from a customer when we were in a call. They literally said to us that they have one single sort of truth in the environment, and that's the ServiceNow CMDB. And they wanted everything, or as much as possible, to originate from that specific source, including, for example, the service account to the application and application security being enforced by Silverfort. I'm not sure, maybe you need to pause here, Frank, just to see if there are any questions before we continue.
There was only one. It was a question that chat is actually disabled. So if you do have questions, please type them in the Q&A section in Zoom, and we'll be monitoring that Q&A section and answering them along the way. But other than that, Davey, keep on going.
All right, cool. All right, so we've been talking about service accounts, the way we approach them at Silverfort. We briefly touched on ServiceNow and the CMDB and why we built the app. So let's just quickly look at the app now itself, on what we build or what you can expect from it. So the things we discussed could be visualized like this. There's a ServiceNow CMDB. You can see the applications in there. That's the part of the CMDB that we're focusing on. There's a lot more in that CMDB, of course. You can see some servers, databases, etc., that are in there. And there's also the concept of a user or person inside ServiceNow environment, which can be, for example, in our case, a service account or an application owner. Now look at these relationships in between them. An application can have a lot of relationships, and we'll show a demo at the end of the webinar, and you will see these kind of relationships in ServiceNow. And you can see examples here of running on. An application runs on a specific server. It depends on a specific database or shares data with other applications, but it also has relationship with users. For example, it's owned by someone in the company or a group, and it runs via a service account. If we bring in the integration app that we wrote, there are two components on this. There is the Silverfort Service Account Protection app. That app basically monitors the CMDB all the time for changes. What it looks for is the data that it needs to update the service account policy, of course, but it looks for changes to an app that has a service account related to it, because we build our policy based on the service account, and we want to protect those service accounts. So whenever there's an application in there that is related to a service account, has this run via a link at the left side of the screen. Any change appearing there, and let's say a server being added or any change for the application will automatically be fetched. We will start processing, or the application will start processing the data that it needs, and then update the Silverfort policy instantly. There's a second part, which is the Silverfort risk extension. We haven't talked about it, but the Silverfort product has a Silverfort risk engine capability, which basically looks at all kinds of malicious or wrong behavior, abnormal behavior for accounts, machines, etc., and puts risk indicators and risk scores on these entities. A service account is one of the entities that can have a risk score and risk indicators. For example, if there would be a curb roasting attack on your service account, we would see that, we would flag it and say something is off. What we do now with this extension is basically pull in that risk info from Silverfort and update it into an extension on that service account user record. So the person, let's say the application owner or people working in ServiceNow, would see on that account and see on the application that we have seen some kind of risk on this account from our platform, and that it's directly visible in ServiceNow. A little bit more on how this works in the back. I already explained it a bit. So we monitor the CMDB. When we see changes, we update the Silverfort service account virtual fencing policy. We do this in real time. So whenever something changes, we fetch the data that we need, we clean it up, we make sure that we update, and we make sure that we don't mess up any other policy. So what we do, that it is correct and reflects your environment. We update the policy based on the relationships, and we completed the policy with IP, host names, etc., all the info that we have available. Important to know, and it's in bold here, is that we run this app inside your ServiceNow instance. Right? We'll see later how where you can get it, but it runs inside ServiceNow as an extension app. So it doesn't run on the Silver platform, it doesn't run somewhere externally, it runs inside your ServiceNow tenant. And we do it built on, it's been built based on our service accounts API. So we put an API communication on between the extension app in ServiceNow and your Silverfort environment. Just one more word on the relationships that we use. Looks familiar, the relationship view in ServiceNow, when you look for an application and all the relationships that it has, this is a view that you can get. We've seen now what the usages of these CI relationships. You see a few examples here. This is the standard way of how ServiceNow defines or instructs you to build relationships. The ones that we are specifically interested in is a service account relationship. That is a relationship between a CI or a configuration item and a person object. If you would link an app to a server, that's a CI-CI relationship. Now, these are, especially the service account relationships, are environment specific. Right? Some of you will have them, some of you maybe don't have them yet, or just don't have them at all in your environment. We don't pin you down on what you need to use. We just allow you to use whatever you want and make sure that you can later on configure this in the application itself. So once you have it, once you have the application installed, you will have a Silverfort Service Account Protection menu in your ServiceNow instance, where you can have all kinds of configurations that you need to put in place, like an environment config, some properties that you can set. And this is, for example, the place where we would like configure the different relationship types that you want to keep track of, so that the application knows what kind of data you need to look for, or that it needs to look for in order to update the process. Everything after that, so once you have configured the environment, set some properties, etc., everything after that happens in the back. So there's not really a front end page that you look for. Everything happens in the back using an optimized system. So there's no delay on your ServiceNow interface at all. It's all backend scripting doing the updates for you. So a classic way of relating service accounts to an application would be this screen. If you would open up an application, you have an option to add relationships. When you go in there, you get to the relationships editor here. And then you can say, okay, you select the suggested relationship type, in this case, run by Active Directory service account, for example. Again, here you can use whatever you want. Maybe you don't have one, then you can create a new one. We add basically, when you click this, you can select an account at the bottom. There's a part of the screen that we made a bit smaller just for easy reading. And then you basically at the end, at the bottom, you will have now that relationship in place. You click save, you update the policy, the CMDB, and that relationship will then be in place. Once that happened, your application scans for data, as I said, and it will update our policy. For example, here you can see that it added sources to this service account automatically to this policy. One more remark before we continue on the next section is that we also noticed, and we discussed this also with customers, is that not everybody is using this built-in relationship mechanism that ServiceNow has. Sometimes, and it happens quite a lot actually, that customers have their own schema in place. They have their own way of linking, let's say, applications to service using another table, or even linking service accounts to an application using their own CMDB schema. We added support for this since version 24.4.7 of the app, which has been released somewhere in April this year, where we now allow what we call the custom service account table instead of the built-in user table. But that basically means that if you have an environment and you're not using these relationship types that CMDB offers, but you use other kinds of tables, that's fine. We can also leverage that. We can also add that in our configuration. It's in there, and then you can continue using that. So again, we're not pinning you down on using something, or we're not forcing you on using anything that we want you to do. You can keep using your way of working. So maybe another pause here, see if there are any questions before we dive into use cases.
Yeah, there are a couple questions here. So the first is, what table in ServiceNow is the Silverfort risk data written to?
The risk data is an extension to the person table, right? So what we do is we add an extension there, and we also add there's a default view, or maybe using another view for that. We add our own Silverfort view. So when you change that field, you will see the risk score and the risk indicators that make up that score as an extension field to the person record.
Perfect. And then I think you touched on this after the question was asked, but so the question is, you're using the ServiceNow application service mapping to create the runs via relationship in ServiceNow, or does the application manager need to create that connection? So I think a question about the relationship that is set up in ServiceNow between the application and the machine account itself.
Yeah, so the relation between the app and the machine account is defined in a relationship type, a type that is to build a relationship between a CI and a person object. Again, you can have whatever you want there. And then basically, indeed, like an application owner would link that service account to that application. Once he does that, and that's what also will be the example that we were showing in the demo later on. Once he does that, the whole thing starts working. But indeed, linking those two together is the work of application owner, people working in ServiceNow, the ones that are responsible for that CMDB component. I hope that
Perfect.
answers.
And then, yeah, and then the last question is, any plans to integrate ServiceNow change management requests in the future so that approved or failed changes could be reflected in Silverfort for service accounts, for instance, admin account protection via request? I can answer that one. We don't have any direct plans for that integration, but I'd love to understand a little bit more about your use case, Eric. So if you're open to it, I can reach out to you after the call and we can dive into it a little deeper. And I think that, from what I'm seeing, is all of them. So let's go to the next section.
All right, cool. So we're just going to talk briefly about some use cases, show you where you can get it, and then we'll dive right into the demo. So just two simple use cases that we have encountered or seen with our customers that are using this integration app for now. One of them is the scaling. So we had a customer who installed Silverfort, where we had a successful project there, and they discovered, or Silverfort discovered, more than 2,000 active service accounts in the environment. So a big environment. Now that we have there, the customer also mentioned that they have ServiceNow, and that's how we rolled into this project to get the integration app there. Is that they have these service accounts in their CMDB and linked to applications. They used the custom schema that I mentioned before, but we got everything in there, and then they started building automatically these policies in a controlled way, just to make sure, because of course, first time you do this, make sure that you keep control on this. But they were auto-enforcing policies, and basically this app helped them to start securing all their apps and these accounts at a massive scale. We also, which was interesting, is that we actually completed their ServiceNow info with the accounts that we discovered, because they were not having all the service accounts linked to apps that we saw in the environment. So we discovered more accounts that they actually had linked there. They were in the CMDB or in ServiceNow, but they were not linked to any, let's say, app or service running. So that's still ongoing, getting that last mile in there. But it's great to see how this all glues together, and now they just change things in the CMDB, and they don't need to worry about how the Silverfort policy looks like. It just follows along with what they do. A second use case that we encountered was a bit of a different story. Customer having that single source of truth in the ServiceNow, saying this is what we want, but they didn't have the service accounts in there yet, right? So they brought in their ServiceNow team and asked them to bring in those service accounts into the platform, which they did, and then they started building. Well, they had the app from the beginning, and then they basically started building these relationships in there and get these policies enforced one by one. It's a work that allowed them to have multiple teams working together on a very simple approach, right? The application team basically made those relationships, and the identity team or security team just basically followed along, made sure that the policies were in place, because they were in control of the accounts, while the application team was just updating or making the relationships, and the app made the update to the policy. So basically what the security team just did was validate that everything was properly in place. But just the easy way of getting these teams working together like this without sending a bunch of messages and can you make this policy for me? Can you do this for me? Was all not necessary. It all happened in the back. So really speeded up the process of getting this in place. All right, so the main question, I guess, where do we get this app? Well, I said before, it runs in ServiceNow tenants. So what you need to do, well, first of all, you need to be a ServiceNow customer, of course. You go to the store, ServiceNow store, you log in with your credentials, and at the top, you can start looking for, or you just search for Silverfort. You will get hit for the Silverfort Service Account Protection app. You can click on it. As you can see here in this looped video, there's a bunch of information there, summary, release notes, version history. And at the right top, there's a button request app. So once you click that, we will get this update or this request. We will get it. We'll review and approve it for you. And once it's approved, you will get notified by this through your ServiceNow communication. Or email or something, and then you can install it in your tenant. We have the whole configuration, the way you need to install it, fully documented in the Silverfort documentation platform. If you're a Silverfort customer, you should have access to that. But please, if you are planning to do this, get in touch with us. We're more than happy to help you out, to guide you through it, show you a bit where everything is and how it works, and yeah, help you. More than happy to help you out and be of assistance in this deployment. And I think with that said, we can jump over to the demo, unless there are any questions before, Frank. Just checking.
One more. Does the integration support multi-domain environments, especially accounts with the same name in multiple domains?
So we have support for multiple environments. I'm not sure. I need to think about. I think for now we don't support the multiple domains. So we support multiple domains in Silverfort. And I think as long as the matching is there, should be possible. We can definitely look into getting that, but for now, I don't think the configuration allows it to it. So it's something. It's a good remark. It's something I'll take note of, and that's something we can check out to see if it's if it would fit. But for that, I need to do a double check. To be honest with you, so it's a good question. Maybe Frank, keep track of where we got that from, and then we can loop back.
Yep. Yep, Alan, we will we'll reach out to you after the call and confirm the support on that feature. Couple others now that are coming in. Will this also work with service principals and manage identities in Azure?
For now, we are well. Might be, let's say differently, we haven't tested it on that yet. In essence, it will be sort of the same way, although we don't have the same coverage on that yet. So it's something we need to test out later. The principle having managed service accounts or like managed security principles, must say, or managed identities in Azure is sort of the same structure. If you have them linked to your ServiceNow, the way we put them in our policy would be sort of the same flow. So not something we have tested yet, so not something I can say right now, like as it's there. But I think in way of a look at the structure, it should almost be exactly the same way of working, let's say.
Perfect. And then final question is, who should we contact to inform requesting the ServiceNow integration and get help with implementation? I can answer that. So if you reach out to your CSM here at Silverfort, let them know you can request in the ServiceNow marketplace access to the integration, and we, obviously customers will get access. We'll approve that, and then our team is happy to support any implementation questions, any concerns that you have as you're going through the integration process. And I think, David, let's dive into the demo.
All right, cool. I'm gonna try to smoothly switch to there. There we go. So we have a little recording set here ready for you of a demo. We didn't want to challenge Murphy, all right, to make sure everything works properly. We'll just guide you through it. We'll pause it now and then and just show you what it is about. So I hope you see the video in the ServiceNow dashboard. So
We do.
oh, great. So that's what you're all familiar with. At the top right, you can see where the red circle is, that we'll actually have this application scope. So this is one of the ways you can verify that the app has been installed. And if you go to Silverfort, which probably most of you are familiar with, we have this service account section. And what we will do is we will build policies for a few service accounts that we have here. For example, this first service account is a service account for a capacity control application. You can see there are new accounts, right? There's nothing in there. There's no source destination, whatever. The policy is active, but there's nothing allowed yet. These just have been created newly. And what we will do in the demo is basically link these accounts or link this first account to the capacity control application in ServiceNow, and then we will see this policy being built up. So in ServiceNow, if you would go to the menu as I showed in the screenshot before, you will have the Silverfort service account protection menu item. You can see there's like properties, but also environment config. And here is where you configure your environment. You enter your Active Directory domain, some API information to talk to our API, and then the relationship types that we're going to use or we're going to track, and also the service account relationship types. So these are the relationship types I've been talking about during the slides, where we're looking at the relationship types that between CIs or a CI and a person. Other configurations for customs are in another table, but basically a sort of similar approach here. So for now, we're using the built-in relationship capabilities. Now, what is also, so the part we'll be working on is the applications, of course. So the applications that we have here are a bunch of applications from this company: capacity control applications, customer satisfaction, delivery app, etc. We were working on the first app, which is capacity control. And you can see the version of this application. It's an operational state. It runs on servers that are in a certain data room, and it runs on two servers right now, which is a production server 1 and a production server number 3. So you can see here these relationships. When we dive in one of these servers, we get more info on what kind of hardware it's running, software, and you can see that on the object itself, it has an IP address and a host name already filled in. This is directly on the server object. Going back to the second server, server number 3, get another hardware, other software version, whatever. There's no IP host name filled in here because this server is leveraging the network adapter capability in ServiceNow, where a network adapter is representing a physical adapter that is on the server, in this case HCA 0, and then it has the NS name attached to it and an IP address, right? So you can have, of course, multiple of them. In this case, there's only one, but these are two ways where you can put this info. And there's actually even a third way, but we're not showing that one here. But we're supporting all these, make sure that we can get that info from the CMDB. On the other hand, there's the users. So we sync in the users from, in this case, Active Directory, and you can see the same service accounts that we just showed you in the Silverfort UI with their UPN, so SVCE and cap control, and then the domain. That UPN is the one that we will build a policy on and the one that we use to secure this account. So now we're going to kick into it. So we're going to open the first application, which is the capacity control application. And we're going to start by linking an account to it, a service account, because if you have seen, or you can see now, there is no service account linked to it, only a server and some data room info. So here at the right, you can add a CI relationship. You open that up. You filter away some relationships that we don't need. And there is a run by service account relationship type, right? Again, that type can be anything in your environment. Maybe you don't have it. Maybe you're using something else. Here at the bottom, we filter on the accounts that we want. Look at the UPN, and then we basically select it, and we add that relationship for this application by clicking the plus sign right there. It's being added, and then basically save the info to the CMDB database. So going back to the application view now, and you will see that the application, the run by service account, is now linked to this app right there. Our integration app now triggered in the background, starting processing all the data for this UPN, looking at the service in the back, and looking for information it needs to build a policy. The result is that our policy gets updated. So refreshing the service account page right here, filtering on the ones that we're working on. And you can see now that we'll see there are 4 sources. There were 0 in the last time. And you can see here now that the 2 IP addresses and the 2 host names of these servers, server 1 and server number 3, have been added to this policy, in this case to the sources of the policy. So the policy is immediately updated by the fact that the CMDB got changed, or basically that this account was linked now to an application with having those information. What we're going to do now is add another 2 other servers to this app. So it has already a relationship with a service account. We're going to look for other servers. We have a migration project, scaling it up, whatever. You can see we have 4 servers. We're going to add 2 and 4 now to this application. And basically what will happen now again is that our integration app will trigger because the CMDB sees changes to this app. The app is linked to a service account. So you start looking for all the data that it needs now, and looking at the difference between the previous state basically, and it will update the policy with the new data that is available to make sure that it's completely in sync. So it's reloading here. We're going back to the right accounts. You can see now 8 sources are in there. Opening it up, and now you will see there's 4 IP addresses and 4 host names. So the one for number 2 and 4 have been added to the policy, so that they can start being used immediately by this application. And then finally, with a migration project, we're going to get rid of a few other servers. So we're going to delete them from the app. They are no longer in use, or they should be removed, or whatever. In essence, the service account does no longer need any approval from those servers. So the policy can also be updated with them. So we delete relationships right here. We save it to the CMDB. And again, what happens in the back is our application starts scanning, because it saw a difference. Looking at the difference here, number 1 and 2 is gone from the relationship type or from the relationship. We look at our policy, and you will see, it's just a second, we're going there to the filtered accounts. We still see 8 sources, but if we open it up, we'll see that 4 of them now are no longer allowed in our policy and are actually in the disabled state. We don't remove them yet. That's something we might be doing in the future, but for now, we're looking at this way, just make sure the info is still there historically. And now, but they are no longer, or the service account is no longer allowed to do any activity from those accounts. So those are just 3 simple steps that we went through. A simple example of linking a service account to an app, and then adding some servers, removing some servers, and see how it reacts. There's a lot of more use cases, a lot of more things that can happen, a lot of more relationships, of course, but just for the sake of demo, we try to keep it simple, and I hope it was a bit clear. And I think with that, we can see if we have any final questions before we wrap it up.
Yeah, we do here. So the first question is, there are no additional network or firewall rules needed to be configured for this integration. Basically, are there any additional network or firewall rules needed to be configured for this integration with Silverfort and ServiceNow?
No. So what, again, the application runs in your ServiceNow instance. You might have seen it somewhere in the demo that we configure some API secrets and authentication parts. What you do need to do is, in your Silverfort instance, we need to enable that third-party access API, which is just the default thing, but you need to enable it. You need to fill in some credentials for that specific account for the API access, and that's it. So everything happens through secure HTTPS communication. You don't need to open any inbound firewall rules or whatever to your environment. That's not necessary. We leverage this all through our SaaS components, so there's nothing special that needs to be done.
Perfect. The next question is, do all service accounts managed by the ServiceNow integration end up in the other category for service accounts in Silverfort?
No. So the reason why they were there is because we created them newly. It was a demo environment. It was not it's a bit of a bad demo environment, to be honest. So basically the categories are based on the behavior of those accounts. So there are machine-to-machine categorization will happen when we clearly see the service account acting in the environment. Other ones are basically the ones that we move to there for whatever reason. You might have seen also we have scanners as well and hybrids. So these are categories, but it's being done automatically. The reason why we're there in the others was because it's the demo environment, basically the lab that we did this recording in.
Perfect. And then 2 questions, but basically asking the same here. Will you manage the destination, the other policy elements, or will these need to be configured manually within Silverfort?
I anticipated that question. I knew it was going to come. It's definitely something that we have on our list, right? So we have a lot of things actually on the list. It's we're looking a bit on what we're going to do next and what will basically be on our roadmap. But yeah, we had the question already a few times, like, okay, what about destinations? It's sort of the same process. It's just a matter of getting it in there, but the flow would be similarly. Right? There will be different relationship types that we need to monitor, that we need to allow it to configure, and then the rest is basically all like the same. So yeah, we are aware and definitely something we want to put in there.
Well, perfect. I think that is all the questions I'm seeing so far. So we can go to the next slide. Awesome. So a couple upcoming webinars we wanted to share with everybody. The first one is for Silverfort 5.0 release. This will be on June 27th at 11 a.m. Eastern. If you're a customer, you should have received an email invitation. If you didn't yet receive an email invitation, please check on your customer portal or get in contact with your customer success manager. They can get you registered. This is a major release for us with a lot of exciting features, including service account behavior baseline and some of the new service account APIs. We also have a joint webinar with the Hacker News on July 8th, where we'll be diving into ITDR solutions for identity protection. So be sure to check both of those webinars out. As I mentioned, this session is recorded. You'll get a link in your inbox to the recorded session along with a one-pager that will outline the integration components in the ServiceNow integration. And I think that's it. Not seeing any other questions. So with that, thanks everybody so much for joining. Thanks for spending an hour with us learning about the Silverfort integration with ServiceNow, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Right. Thank you, everybody.